topic of today, personally, I'm really interested in, because we have just we're coming out of this COVID crisis, and I think it's a good thing that even given the COVID crisis, there has been a lot of focus on sustainability. But I think 80 or 90% of all that focus is going towards reducing CO2 emissions. And I think it's really a positive sign that many airports, airlines, and big institutions have confirmed and reconfirmed their ambitions towards reaching sustainability goals. However, even if we reach all these goals, we are already seeing symptoms of climate change. And today's session will really be about what sort of symptoms are there, what sort of events are there, and how to manage them, and how to approach that, and basically how to make airports more resilient against these sort of climate change effects. So how can we handle that? And I think especially since already the majority of operational disruptions and delays are due to weather situations, I think it's a very relevant topic, and I look super much forward to it. So thanks for joining us. And first of all, let me give a big thank you for our panelists today. We really appreciate you investing the time and sharing your experience and knowledge with us. I look very much forward to the conversation. I won't steal your thunder, and I will let you guys all introduce yourselves as we agreed. So with that, I would like to hand off first to Amber. Amber, welcome to the session, and the floor is yours.
Hi, thanks very much. Hello, everyone. My name is Amber Harrison, and I work at Grain Sustainability. My background is in sustainability and communications, and I spent over 20 years in the air transport industry working for CETA, who I'm sure many of you know. Much has been discussed about the impact of aviation on climate change, and today here we're taking a different perspective and looking at how climate change impacts on airports. So the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure defines climate-related risk as the potential negative impacts of climate change on a company or organisation. And it gives examples of event-driven activities such as extreme weather events, longer-term changes in rain and temperatures, and increased weather patterns. The TCFD also includes the risks associated with moving to a lower carbon economy, including things like policy actions, reputational consideration, technology changes, and market responses, much of which has an impact on how these organisations can address the challenge of climate change. Now, climate change and the associated impacts with it remains a central theme in this year's Global Risks Insight report from the World Economic Forum. It's a very good read, and it's very insightful. And in fact, 4 out of the top 5 global risks by likelihood are related to the environment. The first is extreme weather at number 1, and it's a position it's held since 2017. Second is climate action failure, followed by human environmental damage. Infectious diseases, not surprisingly, next. And then in 5th, biodiversity loss. But under the theme of critical threats in the next 0 to 2 years, infectious diseases is number 1, but extreme weather events still rate as number 3. So again, that's over the next 0 to 2 years. And looking a little bit further out across a 5 to 10 year horizon, environmental risks like biodiversity loss, natural resource crises, and climate action failure dominate the future. So these environmental indicators have been a global concern for some time. So it's not surprising to see them emerge in research and reports across the aviation industry. Organisations like ICAO, IATA, ACI, Eurocontrol, and others have explored the issues, and several key themes are consistently present throughout. Temperature changes, which in the case of heat can lead to limits on operating parameters for equipment, aircraft and runway, come through. Elevated fire risks, water depletion and desertification, and even increased cases of heat-related illnesses for travellers are all a risk. And of course, there's the practical elements of being able to cool buildings efficiently and cost-effectively as well to consider. But temperature changes can also lead to extreme weather events, from rain, snow, ice and fog, which affect visibility and takeoff times, to changing wind direction and conditions. And where there's unpredictable change, there's the likelihood for cancellation and disruption. A big concern is storm surges as well, and who can forget those images from Typhoon Jabai that left Kansai Airport flooded with water lapping at the aircraft engines. It was a very memorable image. Large volumes of water can lead to increased pressure on drainage systems and contribute to the damage and loss of access to infrastructure, and again, disruption through access to essential services being disrupted. Now, a well-cited report released at the end of last year by Newcastle University's School of Engineering and the Tyndall Centre for Climate Change Research looks at another key issue, that of sea level rises. They looked at 3 different scenarios, a 1.5 and a 2 degree warming scenario, and the RCP 8.5 pathway, so the one where they think emissions continue to rise as baseline. And if you've read it, you'll be familiar that the analysis has pulled together that 269 airports are at risk now from rising sea levels, and this could grow to 572 by 2100, the year. Now, a modest amount of sea level rise, for example, if it was a rise associated with a level of 2 degrees warming, would place 100 airports below the mean sea level. And the report talks about the fact there's a large number of airports at risk in Europe, North America, and Oceania, but those at highest risk are in Southeast and East Asia. Now, many of these locations have a link to tourism and the economy it supports, although those airports are essential lifelines for island inhabitants. So therefore, these rising sea levels remain a clear concern. And certainly the industry has been faced with the challenge of survival and recovery through the COVID pandemic. But it's interesting to note that the ACI World Annual General Assembly, in a resolution last year in November, emphasised that climate change, adaptation and resilience should be included in these airport recovery plans and remain key issues for the sector despite the pandemic. So I'm looking forward to hearing how my fellow panelists, and my apologies because I think I should have let them introduce themselves before diving in. I just get very enthusiastic about the topic. So I'm interested in hearing how they are identifying and assessing climate vulnerabilities and building resilience through collaboration, modelling, tools and technology, and also what some of these solutions look like. So with that, I'll hand over to Vivek and let you do the introductions and get back on track.
You're all good, Amber. You're all on track, so don't worry.
Yeah, thank you, Amber. So to picture the landscape of climate resilience and then what is there for airports to do. I'd like to introduce myself. It was a really long name. I think you can call me Vivek. So I'm based in The Hague, Netherlands, currently working for NACO Introvistas. So we are part of the Royal Haskoning family. Currently, we are focusing a lot on helping airports to build their climate resilience. So, and going from the inception to developing the adaptation pathway for airports. So maybe I'd like to continue the discussion what Amber was initiated about setting the scene when it comes to climate resilience. Of course, climate resilience is a complex issue. If you can go to the next slide, maybe I can explain a bit more on that. Just give a quick introduction and then we can move on to the panelist discussion. In that respect, so we see that airport is not only alone in this challenge, so they need to expand their network to address these challenges when it comes to climate change. So one of the things they have to look at is who are involved in this discussions. Is not only airport. It should start from the region and then regulators, and also sometimes some airports are also privatized, so they also need to take on board their financiers. So once they have collected their group of people, and then they have to start looking at how to enable the pathway towards climate resilience. So there are different frameworks and methodologies available. Recently, ISO has already published their adaptation to climate change. It's pretty generic. And ICAO, like Amber already mentioned, that they're already working on developing a guideline for airports to follow with their climate change adaptation pathway. So there's also going to be one coming out in next year, which is going to be detailed when it comes to climate change adaptation. So what I try to do is just quickly show you the simplified version of it, aligned with ISO and ICAO guideline. It's pretty basic. So of course, climate change is different, depends on where you locate it. So it's quite important to understand, for instance, what is the key climate stresses that you have in your locality, and then try to identify the top 3 or 4 before we dive into the impacts that you want to look at. At the same time, at an airport, there are different assets and operations. At the same time, I think it's not necessary to look at all the things that you need to focus on the critical assets and operations. It's also the step that you need to look at. So once we have this better understanding of the climate and also what type of critical assets and operations that you have at your airport, then you can start assessing the impacts on assets and operations. So there are different ways to do it. So once you kind of really identified the level of impact, then I think depending on your organization and then the type of stakeholders that you have, of course, you need to define your risk level. What is the risk level that you're willing to take? So once you have decided that, I think then we can start looking at the solutions. So normally, we always jump to solutions, but I think when we start addressing climate resilience, so we need to first understand the problem at hand before we jump to conclusions and also look into solutions. This is where I think we need to involve quite a lot of stakeholders. Why? Because I think in the next slide it's clearly explained. So how complex the climate change issue is, because it is a chain reaction, for instance. So it's not only airports are affected. If airports are affected, it also has a cascade effect on the business around the airport. And then if the business are impacted, it has an economic damage. So I think one of the insurance companies have already evaluated that in that currently in 2020, which is the level of impact they already expected is around 80 to 100 billion USD when it comes to climate change events. So it seems like it's also going to increase in the future. They already saw in the past 10 years, it already increased by 20%. So this trend has been increasing. So some insurance companies are already saying that if this continues, this trend, and think the world will be uninsurable. So these are also the aspects worrying the investors community as well. And it's not only the investor community, but also the critical infrastructure owners. So not one sector can solve this issue, so they need to work together, especially when it comes to airports. The key stakeholders here, I think it depends on the country. It's your province or your national governments or your ministries which are responsible for resilience, and also your investors and regulators. This is one group of stakeholders that need to be involved in the resilience planning exercise. And then the second group is more closer to airport owners and operators, their own airport community, and also the third-party tenants that they have, including airlines. So I think this needs to be really understood at the beginning. Who are our key stakeholders? I think they need to be on board before we even start looking at the climate resilience for airports. So this is going to be a challenge. Yeah, we all know that bringing everybody on board and then having effective collaboration is very difficult. So in the next slide, I think we have some examples to show that how we can effectively include stakeholder engagement and also move more towards understanding the problem at first place. So until now, there's a lot of methods to really understand the direct impacts, what it means to an airport. But I think it's also important to understand the indirect impacts. Okay, what if one system fails? What happens on the things on the, for example, there's a power failure. How it's going to impact the passenger terminal building? How it's going to impact the airside operations, baggage handling systems, those kind of things. So it's really to sit down and then these kind of exercise will help us to address the issues which normally will be overlooked by others. Before it used to be done as brown paper sessions. Maybe Martin can explain later in this Schiphol presentation how they did it in brown paper sessions at Schiphol. So this is now we started using innovative tools also to bring people together and to have this more interactive session. So once we understand the problem in a more interactive way, and then we can step on to the solutions. That's also in the next slide, which clearly shows that we can also use a kind of a gamified version to really interact with people looking at solutions. Before, I think we used to have a different set of maps. One is the elevation map, one is the flood map, I think, and one of the critical assets map. Then to put across as there's quite a lot of details. Probably the interaction will stop in one point, and we will start discussing more on one topic rather than and we need to address the other key topics. But then I think there's another way of doing it. I think we can convert it into a game and then try to really see how to protect our airports. We can already start looking at whether it needs a robust measure or it needs a non-robust measure for now. And then we can already start looking at the direct impact and try to protect the direct impact with the robust measure. And by doing that, we can, in the downstream, we can already solving a couple of more indirect impacts. So I think this way, it really helps to engage with stakeholders, but also move more towards solution in the end. So I think this is where I also like to hear from our panelists, like how the stakeholder engagement process has been, taken care of. I guess in the next panelist, Caroline is also going to explain more about how to engage people, especially when it comes to resilience. Yeah. By that, I would like to give the word to Caroline.
Thank you, Vivek. Thank you very much to Reboot Aviation also for the opportunity to be part of this panel on this critical topic. A little bit about myself. I'm the managing partner of CSNA International. We're a risk, crisis, and business continuity management firm operating globally. I actually, as an expert in crisis management for 30 years, also an author and a coach to senior leadership on the subject, I started my career actually in aviation, in the sense that my first crisis was a major air crash, and subsequently worked with a number of other crises with airlines, but also airports and a number of airports around the world. So my topic today is really around, once the first step clearly is to build that resilience and assess the risk, business impact analysis, putting in place a number of mitigating measures and tools and solutions to be more resilient. But once you are more resilient, if you could move to the next slide, please. Really how to pull it together. My experience is that these things are often disjointed. So the first part, as Vivek was saying, and also say Amber, was to tackle the before. The response is during. And obviously after, how do we sustain if some disruption, major disruption has taken place? How do we ensure the disaster recovery, but also business continuity? So years ago, we already developed this high-level business model around contingency planning and the ability to build resilience. And that's what we followed as an approach over the years. Now, once all this reflection has taken place, it's one thing to engage stakeholders in the mapping process, in putting in the systems, the resilience, the mitigating actions. It's another thing to say, okay, now what if we have put in place doesn't work? What and how do we practice that? And my experience with airports is focus is naturally around the most common type of disruptions, being air crashes, security, whether it's terrorism, active shooters, and so on, major cybersecurity events and things like that. There is seldom enough time or enough appetite for airports to actually practice other types of scenario. And this is where we come in. We're not here to teach airports how to run an air crash exercise, because there's enough practice around that topic. But what we do is come in and look at what about other types of disruptions. If you could move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So here is a range of practicing and testing methodologies. And so obviously the first is sort of workshop reflection. For instance, the mapping process, the risk analysis, the business impact analysis can all be done through sort of reflection sessions that really consider the problems and try to map action plans. And those are typically what we call discussion based. Then we move into simulation, drill, and full-scale exercise, which are operations based. One of the things that is a challenge why airports kind of hesitate to do too many of other types of scenarios in our experience is that typically the implication for an exercise is that it involves the practice of an operational response, which is highly disruptive. We have already run virtual simulation way before COVID. In fact, we started in 2009 with our first virtual simulations, where we can engage a vast number of stakeholders through an exercise online on a secure platform that allows the actual simulation of the response to a particular event, in this case, anything that it would be caused by climate change. So it could be massive floods, water rising, I mean, all the types of things that have been talked about until now. And the idea is that we can engage the various stakeholders in that process virtually without necessarily actually activating the response, which are actually costly and disruptive. So in that context, for instance, we have run a range of exercises for various airports around, for instance, fuel issues, fuel contamination, fuel supply, fuel shortages, anything that has to do with fuel, but other types of scenarios as well, which are not necessarily massive event and cause for a deployment of responses, operational response. And those can be scaled up or down. So I think the idea, if we zero into this, so if you could go to the next slide, is that once you have your mitigation and you've mapped the business impact, you've mapped the risks, it is only as good as being able to practice and test it. Because the practice and testing, and I make a difference between practice and testing. A practice is a practice of what you have in place. A test is an actual test. Is it working? So I think one is perhaps a little bit more competency based. The other one is more ability to respond, and it is what we put in place working. So I think that the objectives here are very different. You can combine both into one, but it's always better to make a distinction. And so here we zero in on this approach, which is again more reflection, whereas here you really are testing and practicing what you've put in place. And I do believe it is the critical piece of the entire process. You know, the plans are only as good as they are tested. And if they're not tested, and if it's not practiced, people will not be able to use them, probably, or will be much more cumbersome to use them if they're not tested, to use them in reality. And of course, there's another option, which is to observe exercises, any form of exercises that are run by airports. So I think this is the focus in the context of climate change. One is the reflection of what are the risks once we map the business impact. Where are the disruptions? What are the disruptions? They could be validation of mitigation procedures. They could be reflection, strategic reflection. And once all this is in place, to actually practice it and test it. So that kind of, you know, puts a different specific spin on the topic, which is don't forget to test, don't forget to practice whatever you put in place for this only increasing scenario, which is only going to increase in severity and frequency over the years to come. So that's for me. I'd like to hand over to the next person. Thank you very much. Martin, your turn.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'll give a short introduction. I'm Martin de Bruin. I work for Amsterdam Airport Schiphol since 1998. And during that time, I've been involved in the development of Schiphol and especially the water management system during the last 25 years. And we do that in collaboration with the water board in which water management area we are situated. It is het Hoogheemraadschap of Rijnland named. Can I get the next sheet, please? And I can tell something about how we made Schiphol more water resilient and what the climate change have done to that. Not one solution for making airports water. There is no one solution for making airports water resilient, because every airport is unique by its location and climate. Yeah, and that's why for every airport the water treat can come as well from the sea, or from the land via the river, or from the sky by rainfalls, or a combination of these three factors. For Amsterdam is situated in a deep polder, 4.5 meters below sea level, in reclaimed land. Yeah, water management and making ourselves water resilient is not new. Therefore, in Holland, water boards are the oldest institutes of Holland, and water management has existed for centuries in the Netherlands. For Schiphol, the responsibility against water treat is actually divided into 3 layers. The government is looking after protection against the North Sea. The water boards take care of the inland dikes and the water levels in all the areas. And Schiphol, as a big landowner, have to look after the water management in its own area. And yeah, now come to the climate change. In 2017, we've done a climate stress test. Yeah, why we did that? Because our management started to ask questions about what the risk is for Schiphol Amsterdam Airport to get flooded. Yeah, the climate change. It's taking with that you get heavier rain showers, and the area of Schiphol is also there's also an increase of building density. So we looked after our existing assets, and the outcome of the climate stress test was that there are some spots that had to be improved, and we started the program planning for a flood resilient Schiphol Airport. And we've done some benchmarking, and for pluvial flood protection, we've taken a level of a rain event that can happen once in 100 years. What does that mean for Schiphol? It was not all new for us, but we had to improve our capacity of our stormwater systems and the water buffer capacity. We need a good discharge for the discharge of water, a good stormwater drainage system, because we have approx 10 million square meters of pavements, roofs, and parking places. And we have 500 kilometers of stormwater drainage tubes. For the buffering of the water, because it's all very flat, and before it can be pumped out of our polders, we have to buffer the water. We call that altogether we do that in surface water. We have approx 2 million square meters of surface water, that are the ditches and the ponds and the culverts that connect them. And that's actually the third point, that's the connectivity of the water system. We also take care of that discharge capacity improve by making bigger culverts, bigger pipelines, so the water can be guided to the pumping stations, and the pumping stations are of the water boards, and they take care of pumping the water out of our polder and our airport. And yeah, we are we call that program planning for a water resilient Schiphol airport, and we started with that actually 1 year ago, but and we hope to finish it in 2030, and there's approx 150 million euros needed to to improve all these systems. Thank you. That was it. Go to the next speaker.
Good afternoon. My name is Andrea Giordano. I'm working for Aeroporti di Roma since 2006, and I'm involved in the infrastructure development sector. I'm involved now in a new master plan and new decision about the future airport drainage assessment, and I'm involved obviously in resilience and water management. So please go through the presentation. I have something to show you. With me, Giulia Giacometti is an hydraulic engineer, and she collaborates with me since 2015. She's involved also in the items that I showed before. Okay, now I'm going to show you the hydraulic model of Rome Leonardo da Vinci Airport. We go through the framework of the Leonardo da Vinci Airport drainage system, and we get flooding occurred as a result of intense events that we had in 2017. And what is our approach in climate resilient and sustainable hydraulic planning and design, looking at the flooding occurred. Next, please. Our airport drainage system is made by the big area, is about 4,650 hectares. It's a really big area for us, and of which about 1,500 almost is in the airport boundary. We have 4 main basins, and all the water is in the airport is in a land reclamation area, and all water is managed by pumping station. The more important pumping station is about 39 cubic meters per second, and the land reclamation area was built at the first the first years of the 20th century. Next, please. What happens in September 2017? We had a particular intense rainfall events, which caused the flooding shown in the following plan. You see Terminal 1 and Terminal 3, and the blue one, you see the flooding that we have in front of the piers and in some areas of the apron. We have these severe events, and with having apron stands unusable and for about 1 hour, 1 or 2 hours in the peak hour. So it was very, very difficult to us for manage this event in this moment. What I have to underline is that our airport was built in different ages since 1950. So these events occur also for this reason, because we have many terminals and many piers built year by year since 1950. So with different routes and with different laws. Next, please. What we did after this event is to get a task force, we call hydraulic task force, and we make a study of climate change. We put a big comparison between typical hydrological inputs used in Italy, we call VPD, with climate change scenario, which shows one climate change scenario that is called IPCC-RCP4. And the result is that the graph that you see before, did you see in this map, we check the data processing recorded by rain gauges around the airport for many years, and we put duration and the height of the rain, as you see, is the red line. We project with the climate change scenario this kind of curve, and the results in the blue curve. And after that, when we put our VAP methodology, that is a typical Italian methodology for calculating hydrological inputs, is the black one. So we check that the black one is higher than the blue one. So how our inputs are related on the climate change, have a climate change relationships. So when we put the input, this kind of input in terms of hydrologics data, we have to be sure that the climate change is considering. Next, please. We match our hydrological data with some drivers. We study drivers as effectiveness of the option considering the physical system, as time of interruption of the functionality of the element considering, for example, taxiways and takeoff landings. So how many times I have to stop a runway or a taxiway or an airport stands. The vulnerability in the event of a blackout of pumping station. We check also the effectiveness of the option considering the management system. So how is important for us decision-making effectiveness, the reliability and institutional complexity and feasibility. I heard from my previous panelists a lot of stakeholder engagement, involvement is very, very important. So for us is one of the most important driver, even because our basins are managed by different authorities, not just for us. So for example, 3 pumping stations that you saw before are managed by other authorities. So it's very difficult to, normal that we have a relationship very strictly with all stakeholders that are involved in. Obviously, we check also economics in terms of capital expenditure and operational expenditure. Physical system resilience, how our choice, our driver is important as flexibility, resistance, redundancy, quickness, and human resource that can be mobilized in case of severe event related to the climate change, and also secondary effects. So long-term sustainability, environmental impact, landscape impact, etc. With this driver, matching these drivers with hydrological inputs that I showed before, we have a set of results in terms of works, planning, and sustainability, as I show after. Next, please. What we did a big simulation model of the airport using a software called InfoWorks, and we put inside, in the channel inside the airport and outside the airport, many monitoring network data, 44 in particular, many sensors, because we have to construct a model with some network, a lot of nodes and links. I don't remember exactly how many, but as you can imagine, it's very high number. We make a model calibration put inside the hydrology that I shown before. A model calibration is possible by monitoring network data that monitor the flows inside the channels. Then we built a modeling, and with modeling output, we see the flows, the fluids, as you see in the picture on the right upside. And you see that we get the analysis of the model results, and then we match with the drivers that are shown in the last slide. About this, when have the matching, we get analysis of infrastructure management or alternatives as an iterative path, and we chose the best solution. Next, please. What we did from 2018, we made a 22 million euros investment to have a really resilient infrastructure that is very important, because consider the climate change scenario by accumulating by a distributed network inside all the airport, all the major part of the airport. So we did a big distributed system that allows us also to balance the water and the fluids in case of a severe event between one basin and another one, if one of each other fall down or cannot receive water enough. About some numbers, we have about 67 kilometers of pipelines. We have a spillway that is very important for balancing flows between 2 basins, and also a lot of works. In terms of time, this works during about 3 years. And you can imagine in terms of operational ways, what is our difficulty to to put in place, because every network, every distributed pipeline is in the many operative area of the airport, a lot of traffic when we did this kind of works. Next, please. So that's for works. I showed before, planning and sustainability. We use this approach that I described before also for planning and sustainability. Why? For example, we study runway 4, we have to do a runway 4 in the future, and we study how is the best solution for drainage system on runway 4, even because we are staying in the same land reclamation area. So we have to check, we have to have a planned and resilient infrastructures, looking at the climate change events and rain severe events. At the same time, we match these drivers and we choose the best solution between 3 kind of solutions. And about sustainability, we are now going into another study that creates a closed cycle of water within airport grounds as much as possible, looking at in a system intelligent that in an intelligent way, so accompanied with the IT solutions, we made an accumulation system that allows us to use water in the channel, because we have obviously a high groundwater level, and it means that all channels are full of water at every time. So we want to use that water and use for treatment and for industrial purposes and for irrigation, for example. So we are now putting study this kind of item and wishes for to go ahead with our approach in terms of resilience, climate change, and drainage systems. So that's all. Thank you very much. Next panelist, I think it's Stephanie. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrea. Hi, my name is Stephanie Mine. I am the Climate Program Manager at Seattle Tacoma International Airport on the west coast of the US. And my job there is, I would say, 98% climate mitigation, so really working on how we reduce emissions. But there is a small percentage of my job that is focused on climate adaptation and resilience. Next slide. So one of the things that a lot of people, when they think about West Coast airports, they think we are all susceptible to sea level rise. That is true for airports like San Francisco and Vancouver to the north of us, but we are actually inland a little bit. So we are about 5 kilometers from Puget Sound, and we are at about 130 meters elevation. So sea level rise is not impactful to our airport. And so that often leads people, especially in our region, to think that climate change is not something we have to think a lot about. A lot of folks say, well, we don't have hurricanes or typhoons or any of these other major storm events. Our temperatures are modulated by the cold North Pacific waters. So what is there to worry about? But in 2017, 2018, we did a climate vulnerability assessment. And the results of that showed that we do have things we have to think about. And there are areas of our systems, much like Rome just described, that we are vulnerable to. Next slide. One of the things that we did, we followed what has been a bit of now a classic way of doing vulnerability assessments and engaging stakeholders, was really to examine a storm event. And much like Rome, we examined storm events that we had in our recent history to see what happened and where we were vulnerable. And of course, the most critical infrastructure at an airport, people think immediately about the runways. How do we make sure that aircraft are landing and taking off? And so when we look at our runways, it's actually a very resilient system already. What's great about our system is that it is gravity fed. So we have bioswale with natural vegetation that's getting all of the runoff from the runways, and that is fed to stormwater ponds that are well below the elevation of our runways. And so we did have one event where that stormwater pond flooded, and that led to some flooding in a creek. So in terms of our operations, we found that they were very resilient, and sort of worst cases, some culverts and some angry fish in the river. And so it made people think, oh, well, we're very resilient. But that's our stormwater conveyance system that's gravity fed. But when we moved to the terminal areas, it got a little bit more interesting. So next slide. And what we found there is that all of the apron areas around the airport terminal and even the roadways serving the airport for our passengers are connected to our industrial wastewater conveyance system. And that conveyance system, as you saw with the same vulnerability with Rome, is very reliant on pumping stations. And we saw from some of our scenarios that even though we didn't have this event happen because our pumps were working appropriately, is if the pumps do get overwhelmed or if the pumps fail, we could have flooding in our baggage, the bag well, basically, which is at an elevation that's below the level of the apron. And so what that led to is really the same kind of work that you saw from our other airports, where we started to do more modeling to really understand, as part of our utility master plan, how do we model for not just 25-year storm events, but 50 and 100, and start to identify those very vulnerable systems and look at whether redundancy is the solution or other design systems. And so that is the process we are in right now. And to leave time for the discussion, I think I'll hand it over to Christian to guide the questions and panel discussion. So thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie, and all the other panelists. I would say let's start. We got one question in from the audience. If there's anyone else who has a question, please drop it to us and we'll take it to the panel. Question, let's take this one to Vivek. A question from Rakib Ahmed from IGI Airport in New Delhi. His question is, how are insurance providers reacting to climate change adaptations? Are they using any metrics or methodologies for evaluating assets against climate risk? Can you address that and maybe share any insights you have on that, please?
Thank you, Christian, and thank you, Rakib, for your question. It is a valid question. I already mentioned that we already see that there is quite a lot of awareness within the finance community, not only insurance, but also the banks. So what they're currently doing is, for instance, that they are trying to follow the TCFD guidelines, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. This, of course, this comes from the banking sector, where I think they are already formulated 4 areas that they need to look at, basically requesting their clients, so in this case could be airports, by really asking for, okay, what is the level of awareness when it comes to climate resilience at board level, and then what kind of strategy do they have in place. So for example, they have looked at different scenarios, they have conducted scenario analysis to really understand what is the climate risk for an airport. And then following on to that, they also wanted to look at the risk management aspect of it. So do they register those risks and then monitor it? And then the last part is also metrics and targets. This is more related to the decarbonization. So that's also interesting aspect. The insurance companies and also the investors are looking at, for instance, we know that climate change is irreversible. It is happening, but at the same time, we need to first mitigate our impact on the climate change. For that, I think the airport needs to set ambitious targets, which they are currently doing, along with ACI commitments, but also with IATA commitments. So how those things going to impact? So this, they call it as a transition risk. So that also one of the angle that they are really looking at. So what currently happening within the aviation industry is this has not been made as a mandatory requirement from a bank's or from insurance perspective, but I think now it is requested as a voluntary basis to disclose the climate-related risks. So one example, not from aviation, but from the other industries, that insurance companies and the banks are already looking at a scenario analysis for a certain region. And once they identified a risk there, so basically they are conducting the studies by themselves, really high level. For instance, the IFC, the International Financial Corporation, is developing a model to assess the climate risk. So I think that is not yet out, but I think that will be soon out for the financial community and for the insurance agents to really use that tool to really quickly assess what is the climate risk for a region, and then for a particular asset which they are willing to provide cover for. And once that has been done, I think then the insurance companies will also request the asset owners or operators to disclose their climate risk. So it's more like a sanity check. So just asking some questions: have you already done a scenario analysis? Can you share with us the report? So then they start requesting more information. So I think based on that, they can also assess how it's going to affect the premium. So as of now, it's not yet under implementation, but before we know it, it will be there. That's my view. I hope it answers the questions of Ricky.
Thanks, Vivek. One thing I found interesting is we heard, or we've seen that, you know, both Martin, Andrea, and also Stephanie mentioned that all of the airports basically did this simulation and scenario analysis. But maybe Stephanie, let me ask you, how do you? And I think for Italy it was triggered by a specific rainfall event. How was that in Seattle? Was it also triggered by some specific event, or how do you get started on this?
It was not triggered by a specific event. It was really something that was, I guess, part of the identified work plan of something that, you know, every resilient airport should be doing, and really just part of my job when it was created. So my job was, it did not exist before I was hired into it in 2014. And so that became part of the work plan that you know, the airport identified as being necessary. And so really the way that we were able to get started is, I guess, partially related to the blessing of where I happen to be located geographically and the resources that I have here. So I did work with the local university, the University of Washington, who has a climate impacts group. And they actually do, I think, similar to some of the consultants that are on our panel, are able to help you identify the regional climate impacts. So there are many research groups that are disseminating those sort of global climate impacts models and helping you regionalize that and understand what's happening or what could happen. And one other great resource is looking at other utilities and governments in your region. So our electricity is generated from hydroelectricity. So the local utilities have done a lot of climate modeling to understand that. And we were able to really leverage a lot of the other research in the region to help feed into the work. And then we followed models of engagement of our of different airport groups, such as our maintenance teams, our stormwater teams, really following a process of engagement that was really developed more through the US Department of Transportation. And as I mentioned, one of the best ways to at least engage people, because sometimes climate change can be so abstract, and people are, well, what, I don't know, when you tell me some statistic about what's going to happen mid-century or at the end of the century, I don't know what to do with that and from a planning perspective or for a vulnerability assessment perspective. So one great way to engage folks is to just bring up that old event from whatever it was. And everybody has their personal horror story of how they dealt with it if they were on the maintenance team or the planning team or the whatever response team. And so that's a great way to start that engagement and identify those vulnerable parts of your infrastructure or your operations.
Cool. Caroline, I already saw you nodding. I suppose you agree.
I totally agree. I think that's the biggest challenge. It's one thing to deal with a concrete crisis. I mean, everybody knows that crashes happen, terrorist attacks happen. It's much harder to get people around a concept coming, which is kind of here, but is developing. That's why I think it's quite funny. I was just attending actually an event just before this one, where the COVID-19 was labeled a black swan event. It is not a black swan event, not at all. It's been predicted for I don't know how long, and people think because it's never really happened that way, it becomes a black swan event. I think the same thing here. So I totally agree. The best way to start is from a concrete point of view of something that has happened, and the scenario planners around whether you are doing it for planning purposes and risk assessment and impact analysis is to envision deterioration or other compounding components to that scenario, which are obviously anchored in research. And then if you're trying to really test it or practice it because you got everything in place, you then take that even further and complicate it with stakeholder impact. So the stakeholder pressures today in any disruption is the one single common denominator that takes a crisis to an absolute level of disaster. So the airport itself could be managing things very well and may have everything in place, and yet it happens, and then there is the influx of all sorts of stakeholders, mostly external ones, and of course, you know, with social media and everything else, that causes an absolute nightmare, and it becomes a response mechanism as opposed to a mitigation effort. So I totally agree with Stephanie. It is not easy to start from an abstract. In fact, most people hate risk management. They can grasp crisis management much better than risk management, because you got special divisions in organizations that deal with the RM and multiplicities and all sorts of mathematical calculations, and the rest of the organization, it just goes over their head. So now I'm not suggesting that you involve everyone in your organization, your airport, to practice that, but in order to at least get the high level around practicing those topics, you have to try and make it concrete, and the best ways to out from something that has happened and compound it.
Interesting, thanks.
You know, and to that point, I mean, I referred to scenarios around fuel issues. The reason why Hong Kong International Airport wanted to practice fuel contamination is because it happened. It happened not in Hong Kong, but it happened with a Cathay flight coming from Surabaya that almost crashed because it was contaminated fuel. So it came from a reality point, and then they were able to project it. I think that's also human nature.
Yeah.
You know, it's a hard thing to grasp.
Makes sense. I think we got a good follow-up question that maybe Andrea, you can address first. Is how frequently are airports conducting these vulnerability assessment? Is it something that's being repeated periodically, or how does it work at Airport di Roma?
We made about every year vulnerability assessment on this way, because we test our situation, and we test how the system runs, even with the monitoring system that we had. So in case of different situation than we can expect, we move on and we involve every stakeholder, internal and external. And in case of in case of different situation, we check also the drivers that I shown in my presentation, and we get some different weights that we shared with all our management and all external stakeholders. So, for example, land reclamation authorities or government authorities, municipality that is involved too. So we have a big relationships with the territory and with external stakeholder. And this vulnerability assessment we check about every year, or if is there a particular event occurred, obviously we check everything, every data, and we reboot all the
very good. Very nice. Yeah, I see that we're running a bit over time. I think unless somebody has to drop out, I suggest we keep going. We still have the people in the audience. If not, then please feel free to drop off, obviously. But unless then I'd say we're going. Martin, how is it at Schiphol? You also mentioned the assessment that you guys did. Is that also a repetitive exercise at Schiphol?
Well, we've not planned that, but yeah, actually you have to look, yeah, every approx 3 years at it new, because yeah, we have a lot of meteorological figures, and we compared with what kind of, yeah, rain clusters you have to take care of. And we, as I said, we also looked at the costs to make yourself resilient, and we came to an optimum that lays at once at the rain shower that can occur once in 100 years. And then you look forward to the next 100 years and not backwards over the last 100 years, because the biggest rain showers felt, maybe the 20 biggest rain showers felt in the last 10 years. So if you look at the period of 100 years past, then you're not really, yeah, that's not the reality. But yeah, you have to keep watching the figures and also we compare it with actually the kind of the amount of buffering and the amount of pavement have to be in balance. And if there's a you're building more, and the density of your pavements and everything, where the water comes from, increase, you have to also to level up with your buffering. So yeah, I think the stress test we did, you have to repeat that every 3 years to keep an eye on it.
Okay, interesting. And I think you touched upon an interesting topic around investments related to this resilience, right? Because these are huge investments that we're talking about, and I'm curious to anyone from the panel who has an opinion about this, if there's any specific thoughts around investments into these resilience projects, and especially would maybe also be interested to make the link with the COVID crisis. If they are affected somehow, if they're potentially suffering, or if maybe the COVID crisis is even an opportunity to do some of these works now that traffic is lower than normal. Is there anyone in the panel who has an opinion on that?
Yeah, I can say something about how we done it at Schiphol. We made actually a planning for the coming 10 years, and we put the flag in 2030 where it we should be water resistant against that protection level. But now with less incomes because of the corona crisis, yeah, we have actually delayed our plans about 2 years, and yeah, we see every year maybe the income increases again, and then we can it stays within 2 years, or maybe we have to delay it more. Yeah, we have to compare all the costs, not only the water resiliency. So yeah. But the Schiphol we delayed it for approx 2 years. Yeah.
I see. Okay. And any thoughts on that from Rome or Seattle, Andrea or Stephanie?
Sorry, we invest a lot in the past years, really. So now we in the COVID pandemic era, we don't think about chances to build something without traffic, because really we made this big infrastructure, and so we thought about the future, but about the long term. So it's about 2030. We assess some drainage infrastructure for the long-term master plan and for runway 4. But at the moment, we don't have the chance. We don't think about building something without traffic.
Understood. Okay. Another question that I had, and Amber, maybe you can help us a little bit with this one, is how do you sort of know what to plan for? Because I guess the increased rain is maybe a very obvious effect of climate change, but I can imagine there's less obvious effect. So can you maybe give some example of less obvious effect and your thoughts on how do they end up on your radar?
Sure.
Yeah.
I think obviously the climate change impacts are going to be different by region and by location. But I think a couple of ones which come through, particularly in the World Economic Forum report, and which are a little bit more broad, refer to things like biodiversity. So looking forward to 5 to 10 years in the context of airports and natural habitats. Most good airports have good environmental and natural and biodiversity programs around their operations. But with these changing temperatures, you're starting to see a change in habitat and potentially loss of natural and native species, invasion of new species, but also different types of wildlife coming into an area, and that can lead to different types of wildlife hazards. So whether it's unexpected animals or creatures on the runway, or more bird strikes through changing migration patterns, that's something which could impact airports and the aircraft operations. I think another one as well is around tourism, and obviously we think, I tend to think of flights usually as a business because that's the way I normally travel, but you have the impact on tourism for changes in the climate that affect the destination that people want to go to. So for example, is there enough snow to go skiing? Is it just too hot to go and visit? Are the coral reefs that you want to go and see being bleached? Is there a bigger risk of fire? So there's kinds of different aspects there which might affect the choices that people make to go to particular destinations, and then therefore the sort of related passenger numbers for those airports as well. So those are a couple of ones that kind of come to mind.
All right, thanks. We got another question from the audience that I think maybe some makes sense to take. And Caroline, maybe you're a good person to take it. It's also about investment in these resilience projects, about how are these decisions being made, because there's not always a clear ROI, but it's usually looking at opportunity cost or probabilistic cost. And how would you suggest from your point of view how to manage in these investment decisions? And maybe related to that, is there any sort of best practices also from other industries that you guys see?
So I think the word to use before we talk about investment is commitment. Is the airport committed to being resilient? And therefore, what does that mean? If you have that commitment, that typically, so this is something that I always mention. First of all, risk management or the assessment of vulnerability is what I call a pull-up phenomenon in the organization. You try to lift the risks from the lower level up to top leadership. Whereas crisis management, crisis response, investment in resilience is a push-down phenomenon. If you have that commitment at the top, you have to also be realistic that there may be periods of time where you clearly have a downturn and you will be able to do less, but you will still commit to do something. I think that is the approach. That's why I personally prefer the word commitment. And that dictates the level of engagement that you may have. Now you can have the optimal plan, the medium plan, and the low plan in that scenario. At the end of the day, I think being resilient for climate change, being resilient for air crashes or other types of disruptions in aviation is the life jacket. It's having that life jacket working, making sure everybody knows how it works in case it happens, knowing that, likelihood is it doesn't have to. Whereas climate change is a more slow burn and, like we said earlier, abstract, therefore harder to envision, even though there have been events that point clearly to what can happen when you have consequences of this climate change and the impact. So I think it takes a bit of a bold commitment from the top. It's interesting because even if we make the analogy to COVID, a lot of people have asked me, are people going to be more committed to crisis preparedness and resilience than before? And my answer is those that were already committed will probably be more committed. The ones that sit in the middle might do a little bit more. And the ones who never really did very much are probably wiping their forehead, thank God we didn't get hit too much. And so it sounds like a pretty simplistic response to the topic, but I think it starts with commitment. and investments, there is a lot of premiums across, I mean, a lot of insurance programs, a lot of things are there so that you can actually reduce certain costs by demonstrating that you are ready. It's not new. It's happened across industries over the years. So there are opportunities to get those things funded, supported, especially if you're critical infrastructure like airports.
Thanks. All right, I think we went 15 minutes over already. The people are slowly leaving the room. So I think this might be a good moment to sort of round it off. To the audience, everyone, thanks so much for joining, and thanks for the questions that came from there. Thanks to all the panelists for your insights, presentations, and views on the topics that we've discussed. Everyone, please follow us on LinkedIn or subscribe to the YouTube channel. Maybe sort of if we try to put it into two items, I think one thing that I heard prevail almost through anyone's stories today is something around stakeholder engagement, and this is an inclusive exercise, and it can only be successful, and that eventually this is probably also the road to reach that commitment that Caroline talked about just now. And the second thing that I heard that was very prominent in the stories that we heard is around doing simulation assessments and practice and test, and do that repeatedly as we've learned. So thanks everyone for this great session, and hope to see you soon on the next time. And until then, stay safe and stay healthy.
Thank you so much for the opportunity and for being part of this. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.
Bye everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye. Bye. Bye.